Good morning and welcome to Saxton Scene Change Fireside Chats. I'm Ian Whitworth from Scene Change. Coming to you from Scene Change Studios in downtown Artarmon, which of course is Camaragal country, part of the Eora Nation. So just want to pay our respects to the traditional owners of this area and our respects to your elders past and present. Exciting guest today. He was the CEO of company, perhaps you've heard of it, Facebook, when they were going from quirky tech Silicon Valley startup to global tech media juggernaut. He was CEO Facebook Australia and New Zealand. Since then, he, as kind of you may have seen his TED Talks, he's also done a bunch of other interesting stuff. He, through his company, The Digital CEO, he advises most of the top tier sort of blue chip companies you've heard of on leadership, how to manage change with a particular regard to the technical side of that. He is also on the Graduate School of Management. He's executive in residence there. And he's also, interestingly, now CEO of Omniscient Neurotechnology, which he's teamed up with couple of Australia's leading neurosurgeons to use machine learning and AI to map out the human brain and develop techniques to revolutionise healthcare, which is pretty exciting stuff. So, Steve and Scheeler, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
So for those who haven't seen the TED Talk, you were the oldest man at Facebook. You were 47 years old when Mark Zuckerberg was 27 and the average age was 25.
That's right.
Why did they hire you? I'm hoping it's not because they were shooting a quirky sitcom pilot.
Well, I think at the time I joined Facebook, they were looking to bring more adults into the room.
Right.
Mark's a smart enough guy to realize, bringing in some folks with experience is a good idea. And so I joined Facebook at the time when it was just starting to go from being a kind of a cult to being a business.
Yeah.
And so they were looking for folks like me who had business experience, and I had worked in tech, and I'd also worked in small tech, I worked in big business, I'd worked across a number of different industries, and I think it was sort of my breadth of experience they were interested in. But interestingly, when I first joined Facebook, I think I went through about 16 interviews before I got hired. And you might ask why I went through so many interviews, and one of the big reasons was, I found out later, they didn't tell me this at the time, was they were just worried I was too old. This guy's, he's 47. And everybody at the company the average age was 25 when I joined. And Mark was 27. And Mark was one of those guys that said anybody over 30, don't even listen to them. Yeah. So they were going through, I think, this struggle to figure out, how do we make ourselves a business, but at the same time maintain our kind of youthful, move fast and break things culture. And luckily, I fit in really well in my career at Facebook. I was very lucky. I was very successful. I had a lot of amazing people around me that helped me be successful. But it was a really interesting time during particularly the first few months and probably the first year, just wandering around and realizing, I'm almost twice the age of everybody here, and I'm the only old guy, and 47 is not old.
Well, if you remember,
I'm the only old guy here.
If you remember back to being 25, someone who was 32 looked like something that should be in a glass case at the British Museum. Like 47 is just inconceivably old.
I know.
And so what happened?
Well, a couple of things happened. One was I had to kind of earn the respect of the people that I was working with, and this wasn't just people under me; it was people above me who were a lot younger, and including Mark, who was 20 years younger than I was. And so earning their respect wasn't about proving to them how smart I was and everything that I'd done. Actually, it was about being humble, I discovered. And so I would ask people questions, and the main question I settled on was, teach me how to do my job, and teach me what you do in your job. And that puzzled a lot of people at first, but I'd frame up what I was trying to do, which was I'm trying to understand how everything works here. And I realized that turning people into teachers is one of the most powerful things you can do. So I took all these super smart 25-year-olds, and I literally went through hundreds of people, and I had a meeting invitation I would send them, and it was, teach me how to do your job in 45 minutes. And people would give you that time, and I'd say, just take me through what you do every day. What decisions do you make? What tools do you use? Who do you talk to? How does stuff happen? How does your little part of the sausage get made? And I even did this with Mark. Mark gave me 2 hours and took me through how he works and what happens. And so I formed this. At that time, Facebook was really kind of free form, and I formed this map of how the business worked, who did what my job was supposed to be, what the opportunity was I was supposed to be building. But in the process, I turned all these people into my teachers, and they were open to teach me about their jobs, how Facebook worked, technology, and I just was a sponge. I learned everything. And I think that was a big change versus even how I was before I went to Facebook, where I felt more like, I'm going to tell you what to do. And then I realized, no, you help tell me, and then we're better together. And that was the big aha for me.
Because you were a classic suit manager previously in your career, weren't you? You were with
kind of had
big firms.
I had a suit phase, but I also had a T-shirt and jeans sort of secret life where I did startups on the side of my corporate job. So I'd done both sides of it. But when you go to Facebook, if you're 47, they just assume you're a suit guy, right? That was the assumption. And you never turn up with a suit and tie when you go to a place like Facebook or Google. You'll be thrown out the door.
Yep.
But I think there was just this assumption about who I was based on my age. And, all of us make assumptions based on people's age or what they look like. But over the course of my life and my career, I've realized you can't make assumptions. You just don't know until you get deep into people. That's when you really understand what talents that they have.
So how did your time at Facebook change you?
I think it changed me in a couple of ways. One, I think it made me more humble and just a lot more curious about what other people know and can do. I saw people at Facebook who were 19, 20 years old, and they had just enormous impact in our business. And it was great to see, that level of youth have that kind of impact. So I think it made me much more open to what lots of different people can bring to the table. I think the other thing it changed in me is it made me more aware of the impacts that technology can have on society and for good and bad. And using technology for good is, one of the big credos of Facebook and Silicon Valley. But you can see a lot of the unintended consequences of technology. I've also come to realize we really need to think through around the ethics of how we use technology, particularly things like big data and personal data and AI. These are things we really need to think about. How do we use these? What are the ethics and what's right and what's wrong?
Social media is obviously a powerful rage amplification tool. Is it bad for society?
I think the net, everything has a good and bad to it, right? I was just drinking a soft drink earlier, and that refreshed me, but it had a lot of sugar in it, right? So you could say, well, good and bad in that drink. And I think social media is kind of the same. There's a lot of good in social media, and when you look at the net benefit of the internet in general and of social media, I think there's huge benefits to society and to the world for having the internet and having platforms like Facebook. But I think there's also downsides, and the downsides can be severe. It's like, you take this pill, but it can have severe side effects. Well, there's severe side effects of social media, and we're starting to see those now in the past few years with depression or anxiety or, teen suicide. All these things are actually linked to social media. And then, probably less severe, but equally critical are things like, how public debate is affected and how opinions get formed. We're living in a world now where everybody's in a filter bubble of content that's being driven by algorithms that are, essentially they're, working at manipulating your mind to look at more stuff or to feel a certain way. And I think as human beings, we're not equipped to deal with that artificial intelligence. We've spent millions of years just dealing with other human beings, not with some algorithm that's trying to feed things into our brains. And I don't think this is evil. I just think there's side effects that we're getting to grips with today. And it's in the news almost every single day. We get new stories about this. And so I think that's the downside of social media. But you can't put the genie back in the bottle. We have to deal with these downsides.
Have to deal with it. For those of you who are interested, I'd really recommend watching Stephen's TED Talk on being a 47-year-old guy in a very youthy situation, obviously, which talks about how Stephen learned from 25-year-olds. I wanted to ask you, many of our viewers are probably people who are 47 or 35 or whatever, and suddenly their job has ceased to exist, and they're thinking, what am I going to do? What value do I have as a person? And you've modestly sort of said, oh, well, I was all about learning from the 25-year-olds. So what did they get out of you? What did you, as the older person, bring to that organisation that other people can apply when they're looking for what to do?
I think there's one big thing that older people, and somebody's always older than you, right? So it's always relative. But they bring perspective. And perspective is something that can only be learned with time. There's really no other way to learn it. You can't just, read it in a book. You can't learn it in a course. You learn it over time. And that comes from experience, good and bad. It's that accumulation of different sediments and layers of experience. And perspective is something I found that at Facebook, I uniquely had in many decisions or conversations that we were having about whatever the topic was. That just was I just had more perspective, and it's simply because I've been around longer. I wasn't smarter. It's just I'd been around longer, and I'd seen more things. I'd had more things happen to me. I'd experienced more things in business and personally. And it's just. Remember, the first time you break up with your girlfriend when you're 17 or something. It seems like the end of the world, and then by the time you're 30 or 40 or 50, you've had a number of relationships, maybe you've been divorced, you suddenly realize, well, when I was 17, it wasn't the end of the world, right? I have perspective. It can still be difficult, but now I realize, the world's not going to end because, she doesn't want to see me anymore. And so that sort of perspective you don't necessarily have when something happens to you for the first time. It's when it happens to you for the fourth, fifth, sixth time that you realize, okay, now I know how to handle that. And I think that's something that's unique and only comes with experience. So people out there thinking about, what should I do with my career in this COVID era? Many folks are reconsidering. Look, I think it's an exciting time because I think if you combine your perspective with curiosity and keenness to learn about, new business models or new opportunities to develop yourself, going back and getting more education. It's a great opportunity to go and get another degree or get more education now if the job market's dried up. Retool yourself, relaunch yourself, and think about yourself and say, I'm not 45, I'm not 55, I'm not 35. It's like I'm 25 again. It's like I'm 15. I'm just starting. I'm just getting going. And I think that that's the philosophy I take with my life, that it unfolds in chapters, and that I had a chapter in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s. Now I'm in my 50s, and I've never been more excited. This is the best decade of my life, and business is more exciting than ever. I feel greater. Luckily, I've got great health. I've got a great family, and my father's in his 90s. I'm hoping to blast through to 100. So I got a long time to go. So I think we should all keep things in perspective as well. To say, you've got a long time to go here, and you can reinvent yourself and have a whole second and third act.
Because you can still be 25 in your mind, can't you? Just as have you always known people who were born age 47, and they just like that?
Yeah. I mean, there's old souls in this world, right? That somehow have brilliance at an early age, or they learn and they get this perspective very quickly. Mark Zuckerberg was like that in many ways. Mark's he just seems to absorb and then go to the second and third level very quickly on any experience. And I think that's one of his strengths of how his brain works. What's something we don't know about Mark Zuckerberg? Apart from that, we've learned from that photo that he's shorter than we perhaps thought. Yeah, he comes up to about here on me, and I'm only about 6 feet tall, so Mark's pretty short. What don't we know? Well, just one sort of funny thing. He sweats a lot. Like, Mark is very dewy. Whenever you're
like Prince Andrew.
He's just covered with little beads of sweat. Okay. It's one of the reasons he likes wearing T-shirts and not suits and ties. He's one of these guys who sweats a lot. But more seriously about Mark, I think one thing I'd say is often I think when you see him in the media, he seems kind of robotic. I see him on TV and I'm like, oh God, Mark, you look like a replicant or a robot. And that's just it's just kind of how he's wired. He finds it hard to loosen up. But when he's in private settings and with people he's comfortable with, he's just like one of the guys. He's very, I think he's very empathetic. I think he thinks very deeply about his impact on society and on the world. And I think he's many portray him as kind of, obsessed by money and power. don't think that's, I'm not Mark, but I don't think that's really true. Everything I've seen about him, he is not obsessed by money and power at all. He wants to use the money and power that he luckily has access to do good in the world, and he's trying to do a lot of that through Facebook today. And I think he is struggling with some of that. But then I think you'll see there'll be another act. Mark's only 35 or something, or 36. I mean, he's so young. He will have a second and third act that I think will be even bigger than what Facebook has been, and hopefully the impact of it will be more unequivocally good. I mean, you look at a guy like Bill Gates. I'm old enough to remember when Bill Gates was the villain. And now if the image of Bill Gates is completely transformed. He's essentially out of Microsoft now, and he spends all his time with his foundation. And they're off changing the world and curing smallpox, and he's just doing a whole raft of things with his money and his power that was impossible for anybody to do unless you're somebody like Bill Gates. And his reputation has really changed. I think you'll see Mark move into those second and third acts as well.
Interesting. So now you consult, among your many things, to big corporations about leadership and strategy. What are the most important things? Obviously, it's a much longer discussion, but what are the really important things, particularly given the changing nature of now? What's really important about leadership in June, July 2020?
Yeah, I mean, leadership is a topic that I speak a lot on. I do consult to a lot of Australia's biggest business leaders, CEOs, boards, and they're all grappling with, before COVID, they were all grappling with one big thing, which is how do we make a transition to the future? And the future is this digital, disruptive, move fast and break things kind of future. How do we, a bank or we, a retail company, become more like a Facebook or more like a Google? How do we tap into that DNA? And there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes with that. So it's not just about putting open plan offices and people wearing T-shirts to work. You have to change the culture of organizations. How does work get done? What kind of talent do you bring in? How do you nurture that talent and give it opportunities and unleash its potential? How do you give a vision to people in a business that brings the best people in? Aside from, hey, here's a paycheck and you work for a bank. That doesn't excite the best talent the way it used to just a few years ago. And ultimately, it's a war for talent, right? The best companies, even small companies, you're trying to get the best people you can.
True.
And great people have choices. Probably not as many choices now in the era of COVID, but this will bounce back eventually. But the best people, they can choose the best opportunities. And you want the best people. And so the best people are attracted to the best leaders and the best cultures and the best opportunities to unleash their power and their brilliance. And so that's the big challenge that every leader has in Australia and around the world, every business leader, every government leader. And now in the era of COVID, arguably you layer on top of that another problem, which is, how is my business going to bounce back? And then what's it going to look like on the other side? Because it's not going to look the same as it did before COVID. We're all starting to see it. Many of us are working in this world, remote working, using digital tools that, we never used before, data and technology now playing a much bigger role, artificial intelligence, automation all coming into the fore, changes in consumer behaviors that have already been changing a lot over the past few years. They're being accelerated. Everybody's sitting at home waiting for home delivery and not going to the supermarket. So all this says one thing, change. And so how do we get on top of that change? How do we manage it? How do we lead for it? How do we make decisions quickly? How do we fail fast? So these are the sorts of things that leaders need to be thinking about and getting their heads around so they can be, more like a Google or a Facebook or an Amazon and, less like the dinosaur companies of the past.
Where are the opportunities for small companies who want to take a piece out of big companies? If you just had to start something small and new now, what would you do? Where's the opportunity?
Oh, well, there's so many.
I know you have started a whole bunch of new things, but...
one opportunity is an area that I focus on, which is around data and healthcare. So we are, and this is just one area, there's plenty of others, but you think about just a simple thing. If you go to a doctor and that doctor's treating you for something, and then you say, well, I'm going to leave this doctor, I'm going to go to a doctor across the street. You go to the doctor across the street, the doctor across the street doesn't know anything about you. You don't even have electronic records, and you almost start afresh with that doctor. Which Facebook and Google know everything about you. It just seems, but what's more important? How many ads you get in your feed or your health? Your health's more important. So we've got big problems in healthcare that we haven't applied the kind of big data, big technology thinking to healthcare that we have to other areas of life and of business. So I think that's one area. But I think more broadly, just looking at how data and technology and artificial intelligence can transform whole industries, I think is the exciting space to start to look at and start to think through, what are the new business models? What are the new the combinations of value you can create for customers? What are the new products and services that you can almost dream up that didn't exist a few years ago, but will be mainstream in a couple of years? We didn't have iPhones 15 years ago. We didn't have social media, 15 years ago. We didn't have search 15, 20 years ago. These companies didn't exist. But now they've created the biggest companies in the world, doing things that you couldn't even imagine. 25 years ago, if I tried to explain to you what Google did, search, or what social media was, I would have thought, what the hell is that? But now it's the biggest companies in the world. So using your imagination and then bringing technology and data to make that imagination happen, I think that's the exciting thing that any small business can do.
Do you think business has responded as best it could to the whole change around everything being mobile, tech-wise?
You mean in the COVID era?
No, just in general.
No. I mean, business is inert, right? And that's not a criticism; it's just an observation. Yeah. And the inertia comes from you've got to, if you're a big company, you've got to get stuff done every day, and you get stuff done the way you've done it for a long time, and you kind of incrementally improve it, right? Little, 1% here, 1% there, and so that works, and you need to do that. But then you get these big leaps that are now happening with technology and with data. And it's the leaps that are harder to manage, because often those leaps can mean that the business you were running and how you were doing it becomes yesterday. It becomes a dinosaur. And it's hard to kill dinosaurs. Why? Because your business is set up to do things a certain way. That's how people are getting paid. That's how you've recruited them. That's how they're incentivized. And if you don't break things and blow things up along the way, you'll never make the transition quickly enough to the future. And that's the big change right now of the past 10 years is the pace of change that's being driven by technology. You don't have time to, wait 3 or 4 years to see what happens on a new technology or project. You have to get on top of it right now, because 3 or 4 years from now, there could be a competitor that's come in and completely disrupted your space, and you're still thinking about it, right? And you just can't afford to be thinking about it. You've got to be acting.
I guess one of the issues when you're running a business is thinking, am I an old person out of touch with this? I mean, you would have experienced with Facebook how Facebook went from a edgy product quickly to that product your parents use, and there's always a new app. As a business owner, do you have to now be on top of TikTok and Twitch? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, or the equivalent of TikTok and Twitch in your industry.
Yeah,
absolutely. You do have to be on top of it. It depends on the business you're in, but you can sort of see analogs across lots of different industries now. So look at you look at media, right? So you just gave the example of, Facebook is kind of and Google are both the big guys on the block now, and they're taking it to traditional media like TV and newspapers have sadly pretty much died. Yeah. Radio's still going, TV's still going. But then, Facebook and Google, big as they are, then along comes TikTok, and bang. So they've got a competitor. And so, even Facebook and Google got to keep on their toes. But then look at other industries. Look at the taxi industry and what Uber has done to taxis, right? There's no reason why a taxi company somewhere in the world couldn't have built Uber, couldn't be the Uber of today, because their business was cars and getting cars to people and getting them in cars and moving them from one place to another. They'd done it for 100 years. But it was this tech company in Silicon Valley that came in and said, well, we can just reorganize with technology how all that works and meet supply and demand in a different way. And suddenly Uber becomes, the biggest transportation company in the world in just a few short years. That's the kind of thing that only technology can do. It just traditional business processes and methods aren't going to do it. It's going to have to be driven by technology. And I think every business that you're in, you have to be looking over your shoulder to say, well, how's technology changing, and how could it completely disrupt what I'm doing? And how do I become the disruptor of myself rather than be disrupted by somebody else? That's a really hard thing to do and to keep on top of, but if you want to be around for decades, that's the thing you have to do.
So tell us about your work with Omniscient.
Yeah, so Omniscient's we're a brain data company. And about a couple of years ago, I was introduced to a gentleman named Dr. Charlie Teo. And Charlie's one of Australia's most prominent doctors. He's a world-famous neurosurgeon. And I actually didn't know much about Charlie when I met him, but when I did, somebody introduced us, a mutual friend. He sat down with another colleague of his, a guy named Dr. Mike Scheeler, who's a US neurosurgeon who's now here in Australia. And they took me through what they were building, which was a piece of technology that essentially it builds a personalized map of your brain, of any brain. At that stage, I didn't know anything about neuroscience or neurosurgery. But I left the meeting, and they were asking my advice because I just left Facebook, and they were asking about the data side of it. They said, this essentially the brain's a big data problem. They said, well, this is essentially a data business. What's your recommendation? What we do? So I gave them some advice, and then I left, and I do other things. And then Charlie called me back and asked me a little more advice, and eventually he called me up and said they were looking for a CEO, and I said, look, I'll see who I know. He was asking for recommendations, and I put down the phone, and I thought about it, and I thought, well, why don't I do this? Because this business is amazing. Because by that point, I'd done a lot more work on what they were doing. And so what we do is we build this unique, it's called connectomics. You've heard of genomics, mm-hmm. or the human genome. Well, there's also something called the human connectome, which is the map of your brain. And when you think about the brain, it's like a massive spaghetti of synapses and connections, literally billions and billions of neurons. The brain is the most complex thing we've ever known in all of nature. It's more complex than any computer by a factor of thousands. It's the most complex thing we know. Understanding that complexity is really hard. But now with cloud computing, machine learning, and big data techniques, we can start to get a view into that brain that's absolutely unique. So what we have done is, we patented this, we built now through machine learning and big data a way to map your brain so that we can now see things like, I can see the depression in your brain. I can see the Alzheimer's in your brain. I can see the post-traumatic stress tendency or likelihood in your brain. I can even see your IQ. I can see the emotions in your brain. And so when you start to think about that, you say, well, from that core, you could probably build lots of different platforms and products for lots of different industries. So where we're starting is building them for the neurosurgical world, for healthcare. And we're building better maps for brain surgeons. Brain surgeons deal with the worst problems of the brain, and there's lots of problems of the brain, but they deal with the worst, things like brain cancer. So they have to go in and cut something out. But what the big question a brain surgeon has is, when I start cutting, what networks am I cutting? And so we, for the first time, provide them with a map that shows exactly what the networks are that they're cutting. So that's making sure that they don't cut things that they shouldn't cut, or that they have to cut things the patient knows, hey, these are the consequences of cutting this thing. So we're building that now for brain surgeons, and we've got the likes of Harvard and Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic and Oxford and some of the biggest hospitals in China all sort of starting to use our software for brain surgery. But we're not stopping there. We're also thinking through mental health, where we can start to map depression and anxiety disorders and help psychiatrists and healthcare professionals, mental health professionals, be much better at diagnosing and treating mental health. And it's a revolution in mental health. There's no way to map your depression the way that we can do. And then we even go beyond that. We look at human potential. So how can we use our brain maps to help unleash the potential of the human brain in learning and development and education and in things like recruiting? How do we actually help people, and I call them brain owners, how do we help brain owners understand how to get the most out of their brain and how to maintain their brain's health and also to unleash its potential? And so that's what Omniscient does. And we're just at the dawn of our journey, but I think that the 21st century is we're going to have this genomic connectomic revolution, and we want to be part of that.
Broad market, brain owners.
That's right, yeah.
So it's fascinating stuff. One of the things that you find, certainly, well, anyone who's vaguely interested in business, you're surrounded by people who are going, everything's changing, the future is coming towards us at an increasing speed, and it's all changing, but it's kind of not in some ways. What are the eternal things that will not change that you shouldn't lose track of?
Yeah, and I'm, for benefit of folks watching today, I'm not a futurist. I don't come out and talk about, these are the crazy things that happen in the future.
Yeah.
I'm a business person. I'm a business builder. And, I built Facebook. And so I understand how do you take technology to make a real business out of it. And so that's what I really focus on is, how do I technology and how do I meet a consumer need and build value for a consumer, whoever that consumer happens to be. And so that's one thing that's never changed in business. All the technology, all the data, all the AI that's happening, these are just tools to help you, the business person, build a better product or to build a new product or to create new value in a way for a customer that you hadn't thought of before. But the fundamentals of how you run business hasn't changed. I've got to bring a bunch of people together. I got to have other things that get added into that, and they can be, assets and IP and technology and data. But ultimately, I got to spit out a product or service at the other end, and I get to get it to a customer that's willing to pay me money in a way that I can then make a return on investment. And so that means I got to create value for that customer. That hasn't changed. That is absolutely still fundamentally the same. And so, business people who are good at that, good at understanding customers and what customers need, those people are never going out of style, right? They're going to be really valuable thousands of years from now because that's still going to be the same challenge. So that's one thing that hasn't changed. The other thing that hasn't changed is around the people that work for you or the people you bring into your organization. They're human beings, and they still want to be excited. They still want to be stimulated. They still want to be fulfilled. They want to be recognized. They want a path for themselves where they can see their career building. They want balance in their lives. They don't want to just work all the time. They want to have work-life balance and integration between the two. That hasn't changed either. And so with all the change in technology and how we work and everything, those two things are still fundamentally the same. You gotta get the best talent in the door, and then you gotta fulfill that talent and keep it excited and it's doing its best. And then you've got to go with the customers and you got to build great products for them. That's completely the same, and it will always be so, at least during my lifetime.
Human skills, thank God for them. Well, that's all we have time for. This is a pre-recorded show, so we aren't able to get direct Zoom questions. But put your questions into Zoom anyway, and we will put them up on the website via a blog, and Stephen will answer your questions. So thanks for joining us, Stephen Scheeler. Thanks for joining us on Fireside Chats.
Thank you. Great to be here.